Hey guys, it's me again, Barry with Barry's A-Track and Classic Car Radio Repair. And this time I'm not demonstrating a customer's unit. I'll be demonstrating or at least showing off some things I've built to make my job easier and to be able to work more efficiently. Um, a radio conversion takes at least one full day. A radio with an 8-track conversion takes usually about 2 full days. Well, I can receive 3 in a single day, so I have to find ways to work fast without sacrificing quality. So, to that end, I'm going to give you just a brief. You probably know by now. Okay, now this is going to be a very informal video. That's why I'm not wearing a dress shirt. You might see me smoking a cigarette from time to time. I've got a lot to cover. And as you know, there's no scripting that I use. When I hit the record button, it's completely out the top of my head on the fly with no previous planning or scripting. There's no editing after I make the video. What you see on my YouTube channel is recorded straight to DVD. That DVD is used to make the YouTube video, and then the DVD is included with the customer's paperwork so that he can see that his unit was working just fine when it left the shop, and if there's a problem, it's probably something that he miswired or something like that. But at any rate, in my general line of work, I need to be able to test roughly around 15 different types of units, and I've got a list here, as you know, because this is not scripted, so I'm just reading off a list here. I need to be able to test a stereo line level component, which is basically just, it could be like just an 8-track playback deck that does not have built-in speaker amplifiers and needs a receiver to operate. Need to be able to test that. I need to be able to test a quad line level component. If it's a 4-channel, I need to be able to test all 4 channels at once. I may once in a while need to test a turntable, so I need a magnetic phono input. And then on radio conversions, it can be many different configurations. It can be a single speaker with the negative wire, the speaker grounded. That's a grounded speaker basically. 2 speaker grounded, 3 or 4 speaker, with a common ground. But the way a conversion comes in its natural form is isolated ground, meaning the speakers don't have a hot and ground connection. They have a plus and minus connection where the minus is also hot, so it cannot be grounded. So you need to be able to completely isolate the speakers so that none of the speaker wire is grounded to be able to properly test. And incidentally, that is what yields more output power. It was around the mid 70s that they were starting to make a transition from common ground speaker configurations to isolated speaker configurations, simply because the plus and minus thing, it automatically delivers more output power. It's called a bridging type amplifier, where you bridge 2 outputs, and in this case it's going to be the positive and the negative output rather than a hot and a ground, because a ground can't carry audio. A ground's just a ground. So if you have a plus and minus instead of hot and ground, you basically get double the output power, because the minus is also just as hot as the plus is. So that covers that. So I need to be able to test just all kinds of different things. I may need to test the output of a stereo receiver that has either common speaker ground or isolated speaker ground. My suspicion is that newer receivers are almost all isolated ground, because the speakers don't mount onto a car chassis, onto a steel chassis. They're completely isolated, so there's no real danger of creating shorts when your speakers are 15 feet apart, in a home stereo configuration. So basically, I need to be able to test roughly around 15 different types of units. And now, in the old days, when you're first starting out, you're likely to use a whole bunch of jumper clip alligator clip jumper cables to make your connections. Well, just to give you an idea of how much of a danger and a hassle that can be, here's a radio that has, this is your typical Delco 72 series and 77 series. These have isolated speaker outputs, and as you can see, the speaker connector is recessed, and there's 12 contacts on that connector. There's no way you're going to get alligator clips in there safely, So what I've done over the years is I've made adapter cables. Okay, now this, let me go ahead and grab the proper one. So here's an adapter cable for this unit, and they just, it's actually 3 connectors that you plug in. And then the other end of the cable is the standard connector used with car radio conversions. And since car radio conversions are what I do most, and that's with or without an 8-track, it's still a car radio conversion. This is the type of connector used with the conversion. So this is the type of connector that emanates from my test setup and connects to any radio that I might run into. They all are adapted to this type of connector, so that all I got to do is just plug it in, and it's ready to go, instead of fussing with alligator clips. And on this one, before I had adapter cables, I would actually temporarily solder wires to these, and then have to unsolder them when the test was complete and clean off the solder and all that stuff. And so, having test cables is an incredible time saver, and it's also much safer, because you're just not gonna. There's no way you're gonna get alligator clips in there. 12 alligator clips in there to make connection without shorting something out. So everything that I test, for the most part, especially all the popular classic radios, your Ford, Chevy, Delco, AMC, stuff like that, they are all adapted to this type of cable with my various test cables that I've got. Here's one for just an 8-track player. I've got all kinds of adapter cables, and of course the connectors that go in the car are kind of hard to come by, because I'm strictly a bench technician and I don't even see the customers' cars. I work only through shipping services, so I never really have a chance. The only way that I can acquire the connectors that wire into the car is if the customer buys a radio off eBay and somebody cut the connectors off, cut the wires instead of removing the connectors, and the car connectors are included with the radio. And since the customer either already has the connectors in his car or doesn't need them because we're doing a conversion and he has to wire everything manually, there's no real need for him to have those original connectors. So they're usually gracious enough to let me keep them so I can make my test adapter cables. So, okay, so that covers that. Now, naturally, the most sensible thing to do is, instead of connecting a bunch of alligator clips and connecting a bunch of cables and all this kind of crap like that to cover the different types of units, it's better to have everything just on switches, so that instead of messing around with cables and this and that, you just flip switches to make changes to what you're trying to do, to what you're trying to test. And so now I'm going to show you the test panel that I made about, I guess probably 15 to 20 years ago now. It's been used to test to date about 1,040 units, so it's pretty well shot. And so let me see if I can get a picture of that. Yeah, here it is. Okay, so as you can see, the original cheap ass speaker terminal blocks wore out, and I tacked better ones in their place. This power switch is stuck in the on position. It failed quite some time ago. This common ground, it selects between common ground and isolated. That switch failed, so I added the switch over here because I was able to get, thankfully all this switch does is ground all the negative speaker terminals. It just grounds them, so it was easy to get to these things here. But if I have to fix something in this area, I've got these 4-pole relays buried beneath tons of wiring, and it's just impossible to really service this thing effectively. And not to mention that there's no connectors. You got this big old bundle of cables coming out each side, and they connect directly to my speakers and my test receiver and all that. So whenever I have to do any work on this box, it's a nightmare, because I can unscrew it and lower it, but to be able to move it around to get to things, it's almost impossible because of the way that I did it. I used pretty much all cheap switches and things like that. But I'll explain how it operates though. So if I want to test a receiver, naturally the amp has to connect to the speakers. I screwed up. Like I said, this is informal and not practiced. In order to test an 8-track, like a receiver with a built-in 8-track, and even to use my stereo test receiver to connect to the speakers, then I flip the switch. This switch selects either amplifier or isolated. So if I flip it over here, then it connects the amplifier to the speakers for test purposes. And since it can be dangerous to have something else connected to the speakers at that time, I've got a little red warning light that lets me know, hey kid, you got the amp in the circuit. If you're testing a unit that already has its own output power, you can't have that amp in the circuit. You cannot have two amplifiers going to the same output. You're going to blow at least one of them. So that's what this red warning light's for. By the same token, if your unit has ungrounded speaker outputs, and you ground the speaker outputs, that can damage the output section too. So whenever I have the switch set to common ground, I've got this warning light on to remind me, hey kid, double check these settings here. And then this is just a push button that I use to test the dial light, and this shows me that it's sending voltage to the dial light, so that if the dial light doesn't light in the radio, I know it's a dial light and it's not my test setup. And then in these three jacks, this is just your left, right, front, and rear inputs for the test amplifier, and this is just a magnetic phono input that goes to my test amplifier. Those are just wired straight to it. There's no switching involved. All the switching would be done at the receiver if I'm using this stuff. So, all right, so yeah, very handy box. It saved me tons and tons of time and made things easier. And naturally, the most reliable thing in my shop has to be my test setup. Because if there's a mistake in my test setup, then I'm testing a whole bunch of radios incorrectly and possibly not catching all the problems that it may have. So the test setup has to be the most reliable thing in my shop. But this little piece of junk here is currently the least reliable thing in my shop, because I've already had to fix it at least twice, probably 3 times, and it's pretty much on its last leg. It's due for replacement. So here is my new box, if I can find it. And so you're gonna have to bear with me a little bit here. Okay, I think it's this one. Okay, so get a good look at this one, because it's obviously very unprofessional. It looks like crap, and it's almost kind of dangerous. So here's my new box. Ta-da! Look at that, boy. Is that professional or what? That looks much nicer. Now, needless to say, I had to have some kind of enclosure to build this stuff into. And if you go around shopping online looking for electronic project enclosures, number one, they're really expensive. Number two, you can never find the size that you really want to use. The ones that I find they can vary very, very greatly, but you're probably not going to find the exact dimensions that you're really looking for. You're almost always going to have to settle for one that's maybe a little bit thinner than you'd like, or a little bit taller than you'd like, this or that. But this box here is the perfect size for me. As you can see, I'm able to mount everything with plenty of room between the stuff, so that it doesn't look too cluttered. And now this enclosure actually used to be a data logger. Here's the original front panel. I found this at a Goodwill for about $35, and I thought this is the exact enclosure that I want. So I bought it, brought it home, and then of course, I took this thing off. Now, my original plan was to reuse this, but the thing is, you've got some holes already drilled into it, and if you don't have something to put into all those holes, then you can spray paint it black or sandblast off the paint and spray it black, this and that, to remove the nomenclature, but you still have these holes that you have to deal with, and I just don't like being under the mercy of existing holes, and I don't want my project to have holes in it that are not used for something. That's just kind of unprofessional. So at any rate, I ended up buying 3 of these data loggers. Actually paid about $100 for the other 2, just so I can have the perfect size enclosure. And then I went to Home Depot and just bought some steel material to make a new front panel for it. That way I can put everything exactly where I want it. There's no extra holes. It looks much more professional, and it works a lot better. And so earlier I alluded to reliability and the fact that the most reliable thing in the shop has to be my test setup. To that end, okay, we have these really high quality speaker terminal blocks that I got off of eBay. I bought a package of about 50 of them or so. They were all used, but they're such high quality that they're probably never going to wear out. But just in case they do, you might notice that this is 2 sets of terminals for the front speakers. These are wired straight to these, so that if one of these fails, all I got to do is just use the other one. It's going to be that easy. So that's, reliability comes from, in part it comes from redundancy. So I've got two sets of terminal to hook up to this. Plus, I have an external box with these terminals mounted that I could plug into the cable. Now here's the connector that I mentioned before that comes out of the old box. This is the one coming out of the new box. I made it nice and long because I don't know where I'm going to want the new box. If I want, if circumstances dictate that the box has to be on kind of a high shelf, then I'm going to need a long cable to plug into the converted radio or whatever else I'm testing here. So. Alrighty, so on the reliability front, we got these speaker terminals wired together for redundancy. If one fails, I just use the other one until I've got time to replace it. And then now on these switches here, this is where reliability really comes in. These are industrial grade 4-section switches. They call it 4PDT, 4-pole double throw. It's actually 4 separate switches in one. Well, I only need one section, but I bought industrial grade 4-section switches and wired all the sections together so that if a section fails, there's still 3 other sections making the connection. That also applies to these 2 switches here. These are all 3 the same type of switch, industrial grade 4PDT switches, and they sound like Fort Knox, man. You can probably hear it, whereas cheaper switches don't make that much noise. Okay, so just a quick little demonstration here of I'm not going to actually hook up a unit to test. I'm just going to show you what kind of versatility we've got here. It's electrically identical to this other box. It's just much more reliable now, and it looks much better. And let me just I'm gonna get out of here just for a moment. Be right back. I couldn't resist showing you the second box. The third one's already installed on one of my benches, so I'm not going to show you that one because I'd have to do some camera changing around, stuff like that. But I basically am going to have 3 fully equipped benches. I've got all the test equipment for it, and these are going to be the new switch boxes for those benches. And so we've got Fort Knox style switches with 4 sections all wired together for redundancy. I don't expect these switches to ever fail unless they fail mechanically. Then of course I'll have to replace them. But see, these switches don't actually handle the audio signals. These switches only control relays, and it's the relays that handle the audio signals. Now, it's a heck of a lot easier and faster to clean relay contacts than it is to replace a switch. So if I ever need, the only thing I ever expect to have to work on inside the box is if the relays get dirty in about maybe 5, 6, 7 years and no longer make proper contact, well, I can just pull this front panel out and I can pull the relays right out, and where I can get to them with a little burnishing tool and clean the contacts much faster and easier than replacing a switch that went bad, And I don't expect these switches to ever go bad. So we turn it on, of course, and we've got our red power indicator, meaning that it's got 12 volts available to send to the unit under test. If it's a car radio, then this box will send 12 volts, and of course the speaker connections, through this connector. And so we've got that, and we've got our dial light test, and we've got an orange lamp here. And I've made these LED colors intuitive. Red is very common use for power indicator. Now we got a blue LED here that checks voltage on a blue wire. On a car radio that's been converted, there's a blue wire that's used for a power antenna, or it's otherwise not used. And so once I connect, let me see if I got a little piece of solder I can use to bridge these connections here. And so anytime you turn on a converted radio, it should send voltage through that blue wire for the power antenna. So let's just make sure it does that. I've got a little piece of solder here. I'm just going to make a real quick temporary connection between the red, between the hot and the blue wire, and you can see it lighten up, meaning that we know it's sending voltage to the blue wire like it's supposed to. So, and that's the only purpose of this LED, and it's a blue LED because it's a blue wire I'm testing voltage on. The dial light wire on a converter radio is orange, so this tests voltage on the orange wire. And then just like the other box, I have warning lights on these, warning me that, hey, there's an amplifier output connected to the speaker terminals right now. If you're testing a unit with a built-in amplifier, you don't want this on, so that's what that warning light's for. And you might notice that I made these warning lights brighter than the power light, so that it's actually kind of irritating to look at, so that I notice it. And then the same goes for the common ground isolated switch. If it's set to common ground, if you're feeding an isolated speaker output into common ground speakers, that could damage the amplifier section. So there's a warning light for that. Just, hey kid, you've got all your negative speaker wires grounded. Is this what you really want? And if it's not, then I just turn the switch off. And in fact, the default position for both these switches is going to be to the right, where there's nothing lit up. And then as I need to bring stuff into the circuit, I can switch it in after I've made sure that it's going to be safe and all that stuff. So that's the first part of my little treat for you guys. Now here's the second part. I'm sure that you've all seen my output level meters. I like them. They came out of a Yamaha mixer. That's why they say Yamaha right there. They came out of a Yamaha mixer, and I used them for the thing. Well, I've got new ones of those too. Let's go back to, if I can find this. Okay, so now I've got three new meter boxes that I've made. They look a little bit neater, a little more professional. And one thing I really like is the meters are heavily damped and they don't jump around nearly as much. They're more or less an averaging type output level meter, which sometimes I crank these amps up higher than the meters can really handle, and they're just bouncing back and forth like nuts. Well, these won't bounce back and forth like nuts. They're more or less, they're more gradual indicating. So I like these meters better as far as versatility. So I've got 3 of these also, and so there we go. I think let me check my notes here and see, make sure I've covered everything. Okay, so we don't want to use a bunch of alligator jumper cables. We want adapter cables instead, so we just plug stuff in. Okay, I mentioned the extension speaker terminal block if these are a little farther away than I like. Oh, another thing I'll mention too is that on aftermarket radios that only have wires coming out, they don't have like a connector, they have like speaker wires coming out. If it's a common ground speaker unit, then if it's a common ground speaker output, then it's probably only going to have one negative wire, which is the unit's power ground and also the speaker grounds. So you've only got one wire to work with, and so you've got either 2 or 4 positive speaker wires to plug in. But if you only got one negative wire, if you've only got one ground wire, then all the speakers cannot be grounded unless you switch them to ground. So that's why I've got that ground switch there. So, but on an aftermarket unit, I don't even need any of the negative speaker wires. I can just connect the positive speaker wires, set it to common ground, and that automatically grounds the negative terminals of all the speakers, so that it works with a common ground speaker arrangement. So it's just so much faster and easier to flip switches than it is to change cables around and stuff like that. And so in my line of work, especially since I'm pretty much the only guy in the world who has new motors for 8-track players, I get the majority of the 8-track work. And even some of the other guys in the Aurora network, one called me a few days ago wanting to know if see, most of these guys don't want to mess with the 8-track. All these guys in the Aurora network, they're all pretty much expert radio technicians, and they never tell me I don't know how to fix 8-tracks, because any technician can fix an 8-track. They're really pretty simple for an experienced technician. What they always say is, I don't want to mess with the 8-track, which I can fully understand, because they can be a pain in the ass. Some of the things that can happen that somebody other than me, who deals with 8-tracks almost every day, other guys won't know that on some units the capstan slips in the flywheel, and so that causes speed variations. The flywheel turns, but the capstan doesn't always turn with it. That causes speed variations, and these expert radio technicians are going to be pulling their hair out trying to figure out why the heck the speed is not consistent, and they won't think about the fact that the capstan might be loose in the flywheel and not spinning with the flywheel. So that's just one of the many things that these other radio guys call me about. And so I had one call me a few days ago wanting to know if they get an 8-track, if they get a combination 8-track radio in for conversion, can they send me the 8-track section to beef up with a new motor and in a better preamp and all that stuff. And the only reservation I have about that is when two shops share a job, if there's a problem later on, who does the warranty work? Who's responsible for the warranty work? But as far as the 8-track section and the radio section, they only really share maybe a switch or two to switch between the radio and 8-track. So it's not really that risky to work on the 8-track section of most units. So I'm pretty much considering doing that. Anything I can do to to get closer to the other guys in the Aurora network. When you send your radio in for an Aurora conversion, the competition is very friendly in this line of work. Frankly, we kind of need each other, so we freely recommend other guys who might be better suited for the job. If somebody calls me with a 1949 radio, there's other guys in the Aurora network who are much better at the older radios, and they'll have a bunch of old junk radios lying around in case they need a part or something like that. I kind of like to stay with radios that were made during the 8-track craze or slightly before that. So roughly from 1950 to 1980 is the range of units that I accept for repair or conversion. And so that that leaves there's some radios that I would rather not work on, and there's other guys in the network that are better at it. So I'll refer those radios. If a customer calls saying I've got a Wonder Bar radio, I'll immediately refer him to a guy that's good with Wonder Bars. My specialty in the 8-track format and the demands it places on me pretty much prohibits me from trying to add more to my list of capabilities. So I don't work on Wonder Bar radios. They've got a lot of extra stuff that I would just rather not deal with. And by the same token, these guys who are expert radio technicians, they don't want to waste their time playing around with an 8-track that's giving them trouble, So it works out great. And so the competition is very friendly in the Aurora network. We freely recommend each other. I've got so many of the guys in the Aurora network to thank for the 8-track work they send to me, and of course I refer a lot of customers to stuff that I'd rather not work on too. So we all have our different areas of specialty, and each shop in the Aurora network is dramatically different, has dramatically different policies, different skill sets, and stuff like that. And so it really makes sense for us to work as guys on the same team and being friendly to each other, recommending each other if the job's a little bit outside of our inventory existence. If we don't, like for instance, I don't have those little tiny motors that are used in Wonder Bar radios, frankly I'm not worried about getting any. I'd rather just send those jobs to a guy who's already set up for it. And of course those guys would rather send 8-tracks to a guy who's got a lot of recent practice on them, so that they're not pulling their hair out trying to figure out why. 8-tracks, they're simple electronically. They're probably the simplest audio device in existence, but there can be a real pain in the ass and require a lot of patience sometimes to get running at consistent speeds, to get the track change perfect and all that stuff. So at any rate, I'm starting to just kind of ramble now, and the original purpose of the video is starting to fade into the background. So I'll stop now. Just wanted to show you guys my dedication to having a professional and reliable test setup, so there's no mistakes, there's no intermittent operation or anything like that. And frankly, this is a video that I'm going to be watching myself from time to time after, getting stoned, and I'm looking for a little entertainment. I generally don't watch my 3-minute videos that demonstrate customers' unit, but I like to watch the videos that I make on stuff that I've either invented or built or fabricated, or whatever it is that sets me apart from the other guys and impresses customers. That's what I tend to focus on. So that'll be it for this video. It might be the only video I do today, but I want to thank you guys for watching and listening, and I managed to abstain from smoking for the entire video. and hopefully you can put up with my plain old flannel shirt. Thanks a lot for watching, listening, guys. Hope you have a great day, and I hope you enjoyed the video. See ya.